Good evening, everyone. Glad you're here tonight for our final session in Genesis. I was telling Garrett before we started tonight that I have mixed feelings about this. I'm relieved in some regards because I don't know if you noticed, but it's a lot of work, and that's the second part, which I really love, and no, I mean, it's in there, but I have to go back and recapture it all. And make sure that I'm crossing my T's and dotting my I's correctly. Uh, but at the same time, the interaction, the questions this year have been fantastic. Garrett says you're the best winter Bible study class we've ever had. That the questions have been so good. I've already made point to wish Mickey Brown a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Mickey. And a very warm congratulations to the Balfours on becoming grandparents for the second time. Another granddaughter, John, your son John, Lucy Marie, love that. Well, congratulations and happy birthday. All right, let's get right to our quiz. Some ground to cover in this last session. I want to make sure I leave some time for your questions at the end. Esau, Jacob's twin brother, had two different meanings assigned to his name. Do you remember what they were? He was very hairy. And red. That's right. Esau means hairy, and Edom means red. Exactly. Number two, what was so important about the birthright in ancient times? A couple things. Do you remember? He got the lion's share of the inheritance. With the name. He inherited the name. That's exactly right. He inherited the name and the responsibility that was accompanied with that. That's exactly right. 3, where did Rebekah send her son Jacob after Esau's birthright was stolen? Yeah, Haran is where he sent her, but his uncle, her brother, Laban, exactly right, Mickey. Laban, Laban, sent him away to live with his uncle. Bethel, a sacred place for both Abraham and his grandson Jacob, means the house of God. Number 5, Jacob married 2 sisters while living outside the promised land, Leah and Rachel. How many years did he work to obtain his brides? 14 years. 7 times 2, so 7. He worked 7 years for Rachel, and on the wedding night, it was Leah. And then he worked 7 years for Rachel again. How many sons did Jacob and his 4 wives have together? They had 12. Number 7, Jacob's youngest son, Benjamin, was named blank by his mother, Rachel, at birth. Did you catch that last week? Now, Benjamin means son of my right hand. Ben-Oni, O-N-Y. Ben in Hebrew always means son of. O-N-I was son of my sorrow, because Rachel was dying in childbirth. 8, Peniel was the name where Jacob wrestled with God and was renamed. What does that place name mean? The face of God. Mickey might be 79 years young yesterday, but he still got out the answers over here. Y'all better catch up over here with him. 9, there is an almost constant emphasis on the younger or undeserving child as the bearer of God's promise in the Old Testament, making the story of Israel a blank story. There's numerous answers here, but I'm looking for a particular word. I used it several times. An underdog story. That's exactly right. It's an underdog story. I mean, don't you like Hoosiers? And what's the Notre Dame one? Rudy. There you go. Thank you. Rudy. Yeah. And number 10, as a means of healing and atonement for the years lost, what did Jacob do for Joseph's sons born to Joseph in Egypt? He adopted them. That's how they got the land. That's exactly right. He adopted them as his own sons so that he received Manasseh and Ephraim. Garrett, were you stopping me or were you just saying you knew the answer? Okay, very good. All right, let me give you a couple questions to follow up. Have a couple really good ones tonight, and then we'll get right to it. Question number one that I got this week. Excuse me about that, sorry. Why did it take 800 years for someone to challenge Augustine's theology? Well, that is a very good question. But as Buzz Livingston said to me once, they don't call it the Dark Ages for nothing. And that's really the answer. European civilization, as Augustine was dying at the end of his life, European civilization was collapsing. The Roman Empire had collapsed. And this massive vacuum was filled. Barbarians at the gates, no cohesive power to hold Europe together. There were pockets of enlightenment, pockets of education. You had the Benedictines, Anselm, Peter Lombard, a few other luminaries. But the first European university, the first center of learning, 1000 AD, 1100 AD in Paris, before you had any sense of educational centers. So when the civilization collapses, Augustine has the great privilege of being the first and the last systematic writer in Middle Christian history. So there just wasn't anyone there with a background or a foundation to look at his ideas and to critique them in any way. You wouldn't get that to, Thomas Aquinas at 1200. And he did, and his critique is a very good, robust critique, and it is a valuable part of Catholic theology to this day. But there wasn't the capacity to meet that moment. So it's a good question. Question two, you said there is no real objective place to stand when reading the Bible. How can we know the truth if we can't be objective? That's a great question. And the answer is we can't fully. And I'm not saying that we can't come to the truth. And I'm not talking about empirical facts. 2 plus 2 is 4. Right? Right? I know, unless it's a cork involved. I heard you over there. But in daily business, 2 plus 2 is 4, and there's no arguing that. It takes the Earth 365 and a quarter days a year to orbit the sun. That's a scientific fact. Hitler invaded Poland September 1st, 1939. It's factual. I'm not talking about those kind of things. But when you move into the realm of spirituality, philosophy, it doesn't quite work that way because we're all individual creatures and we all have our experiences, and we end up with this word right here, epistemology. It's a terrible word. It just sounds awful when you say it. It's based on the Greek word for faith, pistis. And epistemology is the study of how do we know what we know. And there's just whole philosopher schools that's all they think about. How do we know what we know? What is reality? Those sorts of things. And you begin to answer that question, and we discover that each of us are conditioned by our own experiences, our own physical makeups, our time and place in the world. And as I've said many times, even in this study, not maybe in this study, but in our Winter Bible studies, we all have these that we look through. Because of my generation, because of where I was born, because of the circumstances into which I was born, because of how I have been raised, because of my life experiences, I have a particular set of lenses that I look through and see the world. Right? And you do too. And the reality is that no one has the same prescription. We can have some very close prescriptions, but no one shares the same experiences. And so that shapes how we view the world. And the best we can do and the healthy thing that we can do is to be aware of it. And to say, I see it like this. That's one of the most humble and actually engaging things you can say, especially in a very divided world. I see it like this. Now, that doesn't mean we're trapped in ignorance. It doesn't mean that we can't get to truths that are real and substantial and agreed upon. It just means that we can never remove completely the filters through which we view the world. We can be aware of them, we can reduce them, but the best we can do is admit that we have them. And then we can work on moving toward more objective truth. And then question 3, this is a really good question. When you say we should question or wrestle with God if a perceived directive or commandment is immoral, how should we decide if it is immoral? In what context of society, political context, or era should we make such decisions? It seems like that decision could be very subjective. Would that decision to wrestle with God be different in 50 years or 50 years ago? This is one of the finest questions of this entire series. And I hope the person who asked this question is watching tonight and that they are delighted that I just said that this is one of the finest questions of this series. It relates somewhat to what I've just said. But this is a question about moral truth. This is a question about ethics, really, when it gets right down to it. And this is a huge oversimplification, but I think I gave it to you on your handouts tonight, and I think I have a slide for it. We all operate with 3 forms of ethics, and we all do this when we're trying to make decisions. Do I have a slide to that effect, Garrett? I do not have a slide to that effect. Do you have it on your sheets? Good. Okay, gosh, all right. So one, there is right and wrong ethics. This is based on the law, whatever the law might be. Let's just use, for example, thou shalt not steal. Now that is a right and wrong standard that has been established. Judges and juries have to interpret that, but it is more or less black or white. It does not speak to whether or not that law is just or not. You follow that? It just says this is the law. This establishes right and wrong. So we all, when you were driving here tonight and you saw a speed limit sign, that's the law, right? This is the speed limit. If you're under it, you are right. If you're over it, you are wrong. Cut and dry. There it is. I did have it. See, look, right? No, that's not it. That's not it. Okay, never mind. 2, then you have good and evil ethics. And this comes to what is it that we value? We could say that this is not just about the law, but the spirit of the law. The intent of the law, true justice. Thou shalt not steal is the law. Well, why? Because when you take something from your neighbor, you're injuring them. Now we're moving into justice, right? And when you do something that injures your neighbor, it's bad for them and it's bad for your own soul. That transforms you into a really not a nice person to be around that's just going to take other people's stuff. So we move from just black and white to more just and unjust. And then the third aspect of this is contextual ethics. This is not about the law or the spirit of the law, but that we all find ourselves in situations that demand an appropriate response. And that response will be appropriate given your context. Your wife is in labor. She's in the front seat of your car. She's in a whole lot of pain. The speed limit says 55. What are you going to do? 100. And when you get pulled over, you will explain to the patrolman what is going on. And he will immediately, or she will immediately, if they are just, employ contextual ethics. Get in behind me and I'll lead you to the emergency room. The law is broken, but it's broken in a context where the breaking of the law is the only just act that is possible. Are you following me? Okay. Your toughest ethical decisions, your wrestling will always be contextual. You start in the situation that you're in real time, with real people, rather than imposing some ideal onto the situation. You actually start with human beings rather than some ideal. Anglican theologian Joseph Fletcher, he articulates it very well. And he says, this is not, let me go back to Cecilia Erickson. Narrow ideals have often kept us from hearing, seeing, and understanding what we ethically ought to have heard, seen, and understood. So if the patrolman has the ideal that no one can drive over 55, he's just going to write the ticket unmercifully while the poor woman in labor struggles there at the front seat or the back seat or wherever she is. Joseph Fletcher, Anglican theologian, says when it comes to contextual ethics that we're not talking about legalism, hard and fast, and we're not talking about relativism where nothing matters. He said this, do whatever is the most loving thing. But even that isn't always easy to cipher. If you, Tom, I don't know in seminary and in your training, Garrett, either if you had much of the ethics classes, and they were always putting us in impossible situations, all these exercises to, what is the ethical thing to do, and we were always wrestling with these sort of things right here. For example, one that caused a great deal of consternation in my class. The boat is sinking. Everybody jumps onto the life raft, and it's a life raft for 10, but there are 12 survivors. And with 12 people on the boat, it is now sinking. What do you do? To keep the law is to say, thou shalt not kill, which means all 12 of you are going to die. So who gets voted off? Who gets kicked off? And then it becomes this big scramble about what is the ethical thing to do. Great philosopher. This question sent me back to my books on Wittgenstein that I had not picked up in a long, long time. There are cases where doubt is reasonable, but other cases where doubt seems logically impossible. In other words, some things are cut and dry, some are not. And there seems to be no clear boundary between them. Ethics, so far as it springs from the desire to say something about the ultimate meaning of life, the absolute good, the absolute value, it's not a science. The ethical can thus be described and defined, but never exhaustively so, and attempts at a universal definition are doomed to fail. So, in that sense, if you look back at Abraham and Isaac, and God says, I need you to kill this child. We are, in the 21st century, so scandalized by that, as we should be. If you were listening last week and listening to my sermon the previous week, for Abraham to receive such a command would not have sounded unusual. So in the sense of right and wrong ethics, he was not wrong. It was not against the law. But contextually, Abraham had learned enough about God up to that point to interrogate God about that, because the context demanded much more. And I could, it's 10 till 7. Good Lord, okay. I could go on forever, and I'm just going to have to. I'll have to stop right there. But I hope that's a satisfactory answer in some regards. Epistemology. Yeah, it sounds just like you think it sounds.
Not only fear, and I'm seeing this in friends, is
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And contextual ethics at some point demands a decision. I've wrestled with it, but we got to go. And will the decision be perfect? Absolutely not. And you and others who, if you've ever, without saying too much, if you've ever been on a battlefield, that's contextual ethics about what is done and not done, who is saved and not saved, who is helped and not helped. Because it's impossible to do right by everyone, right? In those situations. And you're right. If we just continue to analyze, all will be lost. The 12 people on the boat, we really need to think about what we're going to do here. The longer you think, the less time you have to survive. Yes, and make the leap. Mm-hmm. That's right. Right. Yeah, you have to make the leap. Yeah, you're right. Good. Thank you for. Great. Exactly. Mickey's example is a great one on the Sabbath. The Pharisees said no working on the Sabbath. Okay, that's the law. But if your animal gets trapped in a ditch on the Sabbath, it is your moral responsibility to save the animal. And you're working. And your neighbor might have to come work with you. And so Jesus was healing people on the Sabbath, and they were criticizing Jesus for working. And the point is, situationally, Jesus was doing the right thing, even though in their eyes it was a breaking of the law. Great example. Great example. Okay, I'm gonna break the law right now because I've lied to you. I'm not talking about Joseph tonight. I'm going to talk about Judah instead. But here's your consolation prize. I wrote this little book a few years ago on Joseph, and so you've got Joseph's entire life right here. Here, Denny. There. One, two, three, four. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I got plenty more. Now, folks who are watching online, you should have been here. Yeah, that's right. Shame on you. I hope I don't run out here. Yeah, send me one back then. That's great. We'll make sure everybody gets one here. You can buy them on Amazon, but I've got one for you right here. Here, give that to Mary. 1, 2, 3 there. All right, look, 2 left. Anybody want one? Oh, good. Please do. So if folks are watching online, I've got one left, and I'm going to charge Garrett with a contest for those who are watching online to get this last copy, and we'll mail it to them. So Garrett, you're in charge of that. Joseph's entire life, not entire life like exhaustive, is in there. It's one of the first books I ever wrote. It's a little older, maybe a little dated, but Joseph is such a remarkable character, and I was drawn to him even as a child. So take that, read it. It's more than I can give you tonight. It's like 12 chapters or whatever. I don't know. So look, it's a bonus, right? Let me talk to you about Judah instead tonight. 3 questions about about Judah tonight. Who is he? What event changes his life? And how did this change impact his brother Joseph? We have a lot of scripture to cover. That's mainly what your handout is tonight. But I think you'll find it pretty intriguing. We find Judah first in Genesis 29:35, his birthday. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to another son, and she named him Judah, for she said, "Now I will praise the Lord." Judah, or Yehudah in Hebrew, means to praise. Judah is the 4th son of Jacob, born to his first wife Leah, and it's from his name that we get 2 very important words: Judea, in the time of Jesus, named after Judah, and the phrase Jew. short for Judah, the followers or the descendants of Judah. So he's quite the important historical figure. You might remember from, if we go back to session 1, we talked about this JEDP hypothesis, where we have these multiple threads that come together to weave the patchwork quilt. That's the Old Testament. It's much more beautiful and more sturdy than if one person had done it on his or her own. And Judah is the main character of the D source. We've talked a lot this series about the J source and the E source, the Jehovah source, the Yahweh source, and the Elohim source. The D source is the Deuteronomy source. This is the historian, the one that's concerned with the law. And Judah plays a very important role in this source because King David is so important in this source. And the document arose during the time of King Josiah, a direct descendant of King David, about 600 years before Jesus. And speaking of Jesus, he is of the house of David, and as such, a direct descendant of Judah. And if you go to the first chapter of Matthew, you get this long genealogy of Jesus cataloging his ancestors. And it begins a record of the ancestors of Jesus the Messiah, a descendant of David and Abraham. And so you get Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, and then Judah's son Perez. Put a star by his name. We're coming back to him. And then if you jump forward a few generations, you come to Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David, Solomon. Another jump, Hezekiah, Manasseh, a different one than Joseph's son. Amon and Josiah, the last true king of Israel. And then you leap over the exile, Eleazar, Matthan, Jacob, Joseph, the husband of Mary. And then Luke's genealogy in chapter 3 of his book goes back even further. And if you work backwards, Shem, Noah, Lamech, Methuselah, Enoch. One more leap, Enosh, Seth, Adam. So Judah is this link in this unbreakable chain of the Jewish nation. And for Christians, we Christians, he's a direct ancestor of Jesus. And the D source reflects this in Genesis 49. As Jacob is dying, his father, he shares last words and a last blessing with all of his sons. And I think we have to read this as survivors looking backwards more than a prediction of what was going to happen. And this is Genesis 49, picking up at verse number 8. I think you have it printed and you have it on the slide as well. Jacob speaking a blessing on his fourth-born son. Judah, your brothers will praise you. You will grasp your enemies by the neck. All your relatives will bow before you. Judah, my son, is a young lion that has finished eating its prey. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants, until the coming of the one to whom it belongs, the one whom all nations will honor. He ties his foal to a grapevine, the colt of his donkey to a choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth are whiter than milk. It's a very messianic passage. It speaks to the birthright of the kings of Israel that will follow David, and it speaks to Judah's survival. After the Babylonian exile, and my premise all along has been that the book of Genesis is written to that audience. After the Babylonian exile, only two tribes survive, Judah and Benjamin. This is very important later tonight, so put a mark right there too. Judah and Benjamin are the tribes that survive. Judah is the kingly, the royal line, from David to Josiah, all the way down to Jesus. And the belief that Messiah, even today among Jewish Messianic Jews, is that the Messiah comes from the tribe of Judah, based largely on the blessing that Jacob gives here in Genesis. So let's read how an event changes Judah's life. It's a pretty good story. It is not rated PG-13. It is very R. But it's a great story. And it's a little detour in Joseph's life. Joseph gets sold into slavery, and then we get this whole chapter about this event in Judah, for Judah. And so I've selected a few verses, and I'll read through them. Here we go. Genesis 38. About this time, Judah left home. He married a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. He named the boy When she became pregnant again and gave birth to another son, and she named him Onan. And then she gave birth to a third son. She named him Shelah, not Sheila. It's real close to Sheila. Shelah. In the course of time, Judah arranged for his firstborn son to marry a young woman named Tamar. But was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Er's brother Onan, "Go and marry Tamar, as our law requires. You must produce an heir for your brother." Let me stop right here. In ancient times, all the way up through before the time of Jesus, a man marries a woman. If he dies before there are children, it is his brother's responsibility. There's a little giggling already about that. Oh my God. To marry the woman and to produce an heir, but the heir belongs to the brother that has died in order that the name and the family name continues. You got it? All right. But Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. So whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled the semen on the ground. This prevented her, obviously, from having a child who would belong to his brother. So the Lord took Onan's life too. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Go back to your parents' home, remain a widow until my son Shelah is old enough to marry you." And then the parenthesis. But Judah didn't really intend to do this because he was afraid Shelah would also die like his two brothers. How are we doing so far? Okay. Some years later, sort of like, meanwhile, back at the ranch, Tamar was aware that Shelah had grown up, but no arrangements had been made for her to come and marry him. I'm going to stop again. Well, what's the big deal? Just go find another husband, right? It didn't work that way. She is committed to this arrangement. So Judah, by not keeping his end of the bargain, is stranding this woman in a state of poverty. When her parents have died, she is homeless. Who gets all the inheritance? The boys. The woman survives by way of marriage. I'm not saying that's right. That's how it was. And so by Judah dragging his feet is putting this woman in jeopardy more and more each day. So, she changed out of her widow's clothing and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Then she sat beside the road at the entrance to the village. Judah noticed her and thought she was a prostitute since she had covered her face. So he stopped and propositioned her. "Let me have sex with you," he said, not realizing that she was his own daughter-in-law. "How much will you pay me?" Tamar asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock." What a deal. "But what will you give me to guarantee that you will send the goat?" she asked. "What kind of guarantee do you want?" he replied. And she answered, "Leave me your identification seal and its cord and the walking stick you are carrying." So Judah gave them to her. He had intercourse with her. She became pregnant. Afterwards, she went back home, took off her veil, put on her widow's clothes as usual. the seal and the cord might as well have been his driver's license. Every herder, farmer, a signet ring, family crest. You following this? He gave her his Social Security number for all practical purposes. There's no way to doubt who it is. Later, Judah asked his friend, I love this scene, take that young goat to the woman and pick up the things he had given her as his guarantee. But his friend couldn't find her. He returned to Judah and said, I couldn't find her anywhere, and the men in the village claimed there was never a shrine prostitute there. And Judah said, well, let her just keep it. We'd be a laughingstock of that village if we went back to look for her. He knows we're just going to let this little indiscretion go. So we move forward to the second trimester. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has acted like a prostitute, and now because of this, she's pregnant. Judah demanded, bring her out and let her be burned. But as they were taking her out to kill her, she sent this message to her father-in-law. The man who owns these things made me pregnant. Look closely. Whose seal and cord and walking stick are these? Judah recognized them immediately and said, she is more righteous than I am, because I didn't arrange for her to marry my son Shelah. And Judah never slept with Tamar again. And when the time came for Tamar to give birth, it was discovered that she was carrying twins. The firstborn was named Perez, and the second was named Zerah. What a story that is hiding there in the book of Genesis. The story is told for a number of reasons. Number one, make sure you keep your lineage alive. This is what was being said to those who had survived the exile. Make sure your boys marry. Make sure that they have descendants. We got to stay alive. That's the first one. Two, it was to legitimize Perez, he of questionable fraternity. Did you notice that he is in David and Jesus' direct lineage? What we would consider to be this bastard child. But he's in the line. He will bring forth the kings and the Messiah. And then the third reason that it is told, never underestimate the ingenuity of a woman when dealing with a man that has been unjust. Now that's the truth. Let's go back to the original question. Situational ethics. What Tamar did was wrong. What Tamar did was absolutely righteous, because it was the only move left at her disposal. It's one of the most clever and consequential events that you'll read in the entire book of Genesis. And she gets to the drop on old Judah, big time, and he admits it. This event will be a life-changing event for him, not just because he's become a father, but this really has an impact on him later. What impact does this have? Real quick. Let's backtrack to the day that Joseph is sold into slavery. The brothers want to kill Joseph, the majority do. And Reuben stops them. Let's just throw him in a hole in the ground over there. And I condensed the story this past Sunday because there was too much there. It is actually Judah who comes up with the idea of selling Joseph into slavery. Reuben was going to rescue Joseph and send him home. But Judah made sure that didn't happen. And it's Judah that sells his own brother out. And he took that coat of many colors that his father had given to Joseph. He dipped it in lamb's blood and he sent it back to his father. And he is the one who delivers the news. Here's your son's coat. Some wild animal has probably killed him. Now, as much as he hated Joseph, that is quite the dagger to put in your father's heart. Right? And Judah is the one who does it. Right in the heart. We fast forward a couple of decades. We come to Genesis 42. The Israel brothers have gone down to Egypt to get food. They are dealing with Joseph, but they don't know that. And in the course of their conversation, they reveal that they have a little brother. This really gets Joseph's attention. Why? He's Joseph's only full-blooded brother. And he is not with them. He is being protected at home by their father. And Joseph does something really, really clever. He plays this cat and mouse game, and he says this: I need to know that you're honest. You've come down here to ask for food, but you could be spies. And he knows who they are. You could be spies. You say you've got this little brother. I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to leave. One of you is going to stay with me as my hostage. And you're going to go home and you're going to bring that little brother back so that I can see him and know that you're not lying to me. This is Joseph's way, first of all, of laying eyes on his only full-blooded brother and the only brother that wasn't in on the conspiracy to sell him off. This boy was too young for that. This is Benjamin. So let's pick it up when they go back home and they tell their father this. Do we have the slide, "You are robbing me"? Okay, we will have that one. Hold that one. They say to their father, we got to take Benjamin back with us. And this is what he says: "You are robbing me of my children. Joseph is gone. Simeon is gone. He's back down in Egypt as the hostage. And now you want to take Benjamin too? Everything is against me. My son will not go down with you. His brother Joseph is dead, and he is all I have left." Remember, he loved Rachel. "If anything should happen to him on your journey, you will send this grieving white-haired man to his grave." Pronouns are so important right here. Because he says, his brother, not your brother, his brother is all that I have left. And there is a sense that Jacob knows by now that Joseph's demise is their fault. How could you keep that a secret? The rumblings of that. 10, 11 brothers in on selling out their own family member. I think Jacob knows. There's no way he's going to hand Benjamin over to these guys. The last time one of his beloved sons was with them, he's dead. It's sort of like a gang story right here, right? But they're starving to death, and so it's Judah that finally negotiates the deal. Listen to this. So Judah said to his father, "Send the boy with me, and we will be on our way. Otherwise, we will all die of starvation. Not only we, but you and our little ones, our children and grandchildren. I personally guarantee his safety. You may hold me responsible if I don't bring him back to you. Then let me bear the blame forever." So their father Jacob finally said to them, "If it can't be avoided, then take your brother and go back to the man. May God Almighty give you mercy as you go before the man, so that he will release Simeon and let Benjamin return." So it's Judah that leads the conspiracy against Joseph. And all these years later, it is now Judah who is trying to make some things right. What made him change? Well, I think this whole Tamar affair has something to do with it. Wouldn't you? The public shaming. And Judah has buried 2 sons himself by now. Right? And now he knows firsthand the pain that he has inflicted upon his own father. And he's not going to do that again. We read on to Genesis 44. They go down. They get more food. They get Simeon out of jail. Benjamin's with them. They're all going home happy. And Joseph isn't done with them. I love this part of the story. So when his brothers were ready to leave, Joseph gave these instructions to his palace manager. Fill each of their sacks with as much grain as they can carry, and put each man's money back in his sack. It's going to look like they are stealing money. And then put my personal silver cup at the top of the youngest brother's sack, along with the money for his grain. Joseph is framing Benjamin, but he has a reason that he is doing this. The brothers were sent on their journey with their loaded donkeys, but when they had gone only a short distance and were barely out of the city, Joseph said to his palace manager, "Now chase after them and stop them. And when you catch up with them, ask them, 'Why have you repaid my kindness with such evil? Why have you stolen my master's silver cup? What a wicked thing that you have done.'" And when the palace manager caught up with the men, he spoke to them as he had been instructed. "What are you talking about?" the brothers responded. "We are your servants. We would never do such a thing. Why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house?" And here they're blustering. Look at this promise. "If you find his cup with any of us, let that man die." Kevin Allen's giggling up here. "And all the rest of us, my lord, will be your slaves." "That's fair," the man replied. "But only the one who stole the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may go free." They all quickly took their sacks from the backs of their donkeys and opened them. The palace manager searched the brothers' sacks from the oldest to the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. When the brothers saw this, they tore their clothing in despair. Then they loaded their donkeys again, returned to the city. And now Joseph has them. "What have you done? Judah, now speaking, oh my Lord, what can we say to you? How can we explain this? How can we prove our innocence? God is punishing us for our sins." What sins are they talking about? What they did to Joseph. "My Lord, we have all returned to be your slaves, all of us, not just our brother who had your cup in his sack." And here is the test. Here is the test. Will these brothers, all these years later, sell out Benjamin to save themselves the way that they sold out Joseph? Situational ethics. When the palace... Okay. All right, next slide. There you go. Thank you. "No," Joseph said, "I would never do such a thing. Only the man who stole the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may go back to your father in peace." So there's the decision. Then Judah stepped forward and said, "Please, my Lord, let your servant say just one word to you. My father said to us, 'As you know, my wife had 2 sons, and one of them went away and never returned. Doubtless he was torn to pieces by some wild animal. I have never seen him since. Now if you take his brother away from me, and any harm comes to me, you will send this grieving white-haired man to his grave.' So, my Lord, I cannot go back to my father without the boy. Our father's life is bound up in the boy's life. If he sees that the boy is not with us, our father will die. We, your servants, will indeed be responsible for sending that grieving white-haired man to his grave. My Lord, I guaranteed to my father that I would take care of the boy. I told him, if I don't bring him back to you, I will bear the blame forever. Please, my Lord, let me stay here as a slave instead of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. For how can I return to my father if the boy is not with me? I couldn't bear to see the anguish this would cause my father." And there is a changed man. And that's why he receives the blessing that he receives in the end. Joseph's plan works marvelously, like a crucible. He just puts the fire to them to see what they're really made of. And thank God, Judah shows that genuinely he's not the impulsive young man who acted the way that he did toward his brother. And here at the end, this is a post-exile message. Who is it that is taking care of Benjamin? Judah. What are the surviving tribes on the backside of the exile? Judah and Benjamin. And you see them fused together here, and it's a message to the exile: you are fused together forever. Judah as your big brother, the larger, stronger tribe, but together you will survive. Great story. Great story. Questions? Yeah, Judah is the first one that she gives thanks to God for. So when those first sons are being born, she's all about the bitterness of competing with her sister. By the time Judah comes along, she's made some peace with that. And she names him Praise. Praise be to God. It's good, Mickey. Other questions, not just about tonight. We have a few minutes. Take any questions you might. I don't know. But she would have had by then, I can tell you this, there were 11 other boys already on the ground. No, she only bare Joseph and Benjamin. Yeah. Don't know exactly how old she was. Yeah, she was. What's so interesting about Jacob and Rachel is that it's one of the great love stories of the Old Testament. I mean, he worked 14 years. He loved her, and when she died, it just almost killed him. And she lived on in those two boys. And then when he lost Joseph, he only had Benjamin. Benjamin was the only thing of her that he had left. So you see why he's protecting him the way that he was.
A really interesting comparison, Leah and Rachel, and they where they compared the two and their response to the trauma that they both went through, and the reflection was that Leah kind of came to terms with her losses and the trauma and what had happened to her. And yet, sorry, it's Rebecca, isn't it? Rebecca never did. So Rebecca actually ended up like the bitter woman that could never cope with what had happened and the regret of the past.
That's a great insight. I think, it's a great insight in that we're so trained to read all these stories theologically. When, for all of our theology and how these stories came together, we're peeping into the lives of human beings. Real human people. Can you imagine the trauma of being Leah and being so unloved and having that favoritism shown toward the younger sister, her sister, who is now also your competitor in the family? And Jacob learned it honestly, didn't he? If you go back, Isaac loved Esau, Rebekah loved Jacob. All he had known, most of us, all we know about what to do with family is what we learn in our family of origin ourselves. Either we do it just like we learned, or we say, no way in hell am I going to do it the way that was. But then we still commit the same mistakes because that's the model that we have. That gets into all kinds of family dynamic stuff. And I would love to see it, Doug, I've never seen it, but I would love to see like a family counselor's family chart of some of this stuff about how it all relates, because it's just so thick throughout the second half of the book of Genesis. We're only talking about Abraham, Isaac. We're talking about one family here. One. And it makes me wonder, did Esau ever say to Isaac, his father, tell me again about that time Granddaddy nearly killed you? Did they talk about it? Really? I mean, right? Can't you imagine those things happening? Because these are suffering human beings, while these great theological matriarchal figures. It's really good. Yes.
I'm going to reword an online question that was coming through. It's about the lineage of Jesus. There we go. It's doing what it did last week. But the lineage of Jesus through Joseph. If Joseph isn't the father of Jesus, how does that work? Is Mary connected to David in any sort of way? Is essentially the question.
Good question. Matthew's genealogy follows Joseph. Luke's genealogy follows Mary. And Joseph and Mary have multiple common ancestors, and they are both of the house of David.
Was there a king somewhere in order that was guaranteed that no one of his offspring would end up being king or allowed to be king? And that was in Joseph's line? And that, or Joseph could never have been his father?
I'm not sure about that one, Mickey. It's a good question.
I know it's been years, but I've searched that.
I'll have to follow up with you on that one because I'm not sure.
One that was not allowed from this man, his
Right.
offspring will not.
Well, I will. Let me dovetail on that and say this: that what's interesting too about as the Old Testament comes together. Do you know who the first king of Israel was? King Saul. And this was not God's design. Give us a king, give us a king. And Samuel the prophet said, you don't want a king. He's going to hit you with bad taxes, and he's going to draft your sons to go to war, and you don't want a king. Everybody else has got a king, we want a king. God relents. David is of the tribe of Judah, as the scepter will never depart from his hand. Right? We read that. Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin. So the plot thickens, exactly. These two tribes, so when you see some of this, and let's read it again as exiles looking back, not as prediction looking forward, that you see as well as this mending of the ways of like, look, Judah and Benjamin, there's been a lot of competition, but you got to stick together because you're the only ones left. And you see that in there as well. And that's not to answer your direct question, but it sparked that in my mind. Is that, generally you would say, well, Saul's king, so his sons should be the next rulers. It didn't work that way. It goes to the tribe of Judah, not Benjamin. Good question.
I often hear, God is love. And then last week, he didn't fight Esau.
Mm-hmm.
And then tonight, you hear where these two brothers that were not too good, and he kind of zapped them.
Yeah.
So there must be more to God than just love, because there must be more to that, unless my definition of love is.
Well, I don't think that. I've never zapped my children. The son in the back, what? But I have lit him up a couple of times. Certainly have disciplined them because of love, not as an absence of love. Someone who doesn't discipline their children is not loving. Have you seen some kids today? And to say, if there's no boundary, if there's no discipline, the reason that's unloving, and I'm not a parenting expert, God. The reason that's unloving is that you are creating a monster for the world. Because when they go to school and they get a corporate job or they do what, the world is not going to revolve around them, right? So in that sense, there's discipline and toughness is an aspect of love. Now, can we explain all of that? God zaps these guys. I'll go ahead and just say, since time is running out, maybe our online audience won't repeat this. Like that verse about Onan, spilling his semen on the ground, has been the Protestant Catholic Church's biggest, can I say it? This is why you don't masturbate. This was the big sexual. No, this is the one that's quoted in church literature. This is it. God will kill you. See what he did? There's nothing to do with that. He wasn't fulfilling responsibilities under the law. Birth control, yeah. So. I knew we were going to get to this at some point. Genesis is, you think, oh, Genesis is such a sweet little story. Good Lord, are you kidding me? Sex and murder and violence and confusion and child sacrifice and help us, the Lord, sweet Jesus, Right. I think Jesus gets murdered largely because his view of God was so far outside the bounds of what religion could take. Because it. Right. Well, if we go back, the question of God killed his son, let's go back to Abraham, Isaac in this sense. I am not of the belief, I just say it as firmly as I can, if we hold the belief that God was bloodthirsty and only Jesus could satisfy God's bloodlust, we are stuck in pre-Abraham and Isaac religion. We haven't made the move. The death of Jesus is not so much about what God did to Jesus as what the world does to perfect love and grace and acceptance. Mm-hmm.
As we travel through all of this and where we are now after Jesus. And so I know my head says that it's because of Jesus that the Lord does not have to be avenged.
It's a great comment that Sarah's made, that she has felt a change in the characteristic of God as you move out of the Old Testament because of Jesus. Well, that is exactly right, because it is ongoing revelation. You cannot say that Abraham understood God the way that Paul did. Because Paul, for example, has hundreds of years of wrestling in scholarship behind him. And Paul, we today are on the back side of the resurrection, looking backward to it. That alone changes, it should change, our view of God. To remain, again, in a bloodthirsty requirement is not to have grown up into the fact that no more sacrifice is required. And the last sacrifice required, the symbolism of it, is Jesus, not because God demanded it, but because God entered our bloodthirsty world and said, I'll play by your rules, and I'll give myself completely over to you. What will you do when God lovingly gives himself over completely to the world, and the world kills it? And the world still does that. The world takes purity and love and innocence and murders it. And people of faith say yes, but life and resurrection follow that. And that's why we're people of the resurrection. That you cannot murder completely and totally ever God's love. It cannot be done. It will always be resurrected. And thank God for it. That will preach. That will preach.
What I got out, especially the story tonight, that God has the ultimate plan far beyond our understanding. And mankind, with all the debauchery and conniving and underhandedness and powers hungry that they can come up with, God's plan is ultimate, and He's going to make His plan work.
God's love prevails.
That's right.
You know, I'll show it to you again. The answer's in the story, and the story's still being told. And the story ends with the triumphant Lamb of God slain, but rising. God giving God's self to a world and to a people that the majority of which may not appreciate, recognize, and may even scorn it. But for those who believe, it is the power of God unto salvation. Is that we believe that love cannot be forever extinguished. It will rise. And for us in the person of Christ.
You talked about spectacles and the lens. There's a very, it seems like there's a very important, two very important opposing lenses. One of which says that that basically God kind of improves with age, morally and spiritually, you know. And He was really like this, but then He kind of gets better, and then finally, you know, through Jesus, etc. But the other lens is that what we're doing is we're looking through the eyes of people.
Yes, yes.
Over thousands of years. God hasn't changed, but our perspective
Now,
of
there
God
you are. There you are.
has changed significantly as we have gone through some sort of human development.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's important when you read the scriptures, inspired that they are, that we also remember that it's also a very human document. And that they are dealing and writing from their perspective of perception. We perceive God to be, let's use the 12-step language, the God of my understanding, which is Bill W., when he said that, was one of the great miracles of American spirituality. I mean that. Because every person comes to the God of their understanding. And the God of Abraham's understanding is much smaller and primitive and tribal than the God Jesus describes in the Gospels. Because Jesus' understanding was so much bigger and broader and could capture so much more.
So all their battle stories that people find so difficult in the Old Testament, where they slaughter everybody and
Right.
kill all the livestock and the people and the children and everything else, you know, I mean that was their understanding of what they thought God wanted them to do. Just like with Tamar, you know, it's their understanding of what God was doing because
Right.
the first one was wicked and the second basically played games.
And this will help too, I think, is a statement I've made often, is that so much of the Bible is descriptive, not prescriptive. They are describing their understanding of God. They are not necessarily prescribing that you take their view. We're back to that great question from the very beginning, right? About the situational ethics, the wrestling with God. That's what we're talking about. Because understanding of Scripture 500 years ago was one established way, and the established view of Scripture now is different. And those who follow us, it will be different still. I hope so. If so, the Bible is doing its work. It's pushing us to have a broader understanding, a deeper understanding of all of this. And this is why I'm sad to see Wednesday nights end, because it's a lot of fun for these kind of discussions. Oh, good.
Jeremiah 22:30.
Jeremiah 22:30. Are we still online? Okay, good.
Okay, that was Jehoiachin, sometimes referred to as
Jehoiakim. He is. Yeah.
He was the one that God said, none of his offspring shall sit on the throne of David and ruling again in Judah. And if you look, he's mentioned in the lineage in Matthew, which would be Joseph.
Mhm.
And a lot of theologians say that's why Joseph couldn't be the father of Jesus.
Right. And it's also, he's the last sitting king who was deported to Babylon, and the Jewish royalty never returned. He's the end of the line. Yeah. Thank you, Mickey, for that. All right, any other questions? All right, next slide. If we're still alive and living, God hope, believe in the one. The Gospel of John will be our challenge next year. So I'll go ahead and get started on that. There's a couple different references in John's Gospel where it says, what's the will of God? What's the work of God? And Jesus says, to believe in the one whom He has sent. And then at the end of the Gospel, the writer of the Gospel says, these things have been written unto you so that you will believe in the one whom God has sent. And I thought it would be a good leap from Genesis to John, because John begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So we'll try to make that connection, leap from Genesis to John, because John, go ahead and give you the preview, John is attempting to recapture the opening of the book of Genesis and apply it to Jesus as the new creation and the new world. Thanks for everything, y'all. Y'all have a great week. One more question?